దూర విద్యా విధానంలో డాక్టర్ బిఆర్ అంబేద్కర్ ఓపెన్ యూనివర్సిటీ దేశంలోనే మొట్టమొదటి సార్వత్రిక విశ్వవిద్యాలయం. దాదాపు 2.5 దశాబ్దాలుగా దూర విద్యా విధానం ద్వారా కంప్యూటర్ కోర్సును అనుసంధానం చేస్తూ BA, BCom, BSc డిగ్రీ కోర్సులను అందిస్తోంది. పోస్ట్ గ్రాడ్యుయేషన్ స్థాయి, డిగ్రీ, డిప్లొమా స్థాయి కోర్సులను ఔత్సాహికులైన విద్యార్థులకు అందిస్తోంది. డాక్టర్ బిఆర్ అంబేద్కర్ సార్వత్రిక విశ్వవిద్యాలయం స్థానికంగా స్వయం బోధనా పద్ధతిలో ముద్రణ రూపంలో రూపొందించిన కోర్స్ మెటీరియల్ అందిస్తోంది. కోర్స్ మెటీరియల్ అధ్యయనానికి సహకరించే విధంగా రేడియో, టెలివిజన్ పాఠ్యాంశాల ఆధారంగా కార్యక్రమాలు ప్రసారం చేస్తోంది. అధ్యయన కేంద్రాల ద్వారా ఏర్పాటు చేసే సలహా సంసర్గ తరగతులు, సైన్స్ ప్రాక్టికల్ సౌకర్యాలు విద్యార్థులకు స్వయం అధ్యయనానికి ఒక చక్కటి అవకాశం. ఇవి విద్యార్థి సమీపంలో ఉండే అధ్యయన కేంద్రం నుంచే పొందొచ్చు.
Hello viewers, welcome to the Teleconference on Literary Public Culture. This is brought to you live from Doordarshan. This is a program from the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University and is related to the MA English course. Today we shall be speaking about the usage of English language and literature in the literary public culture. So the focus would be on public culture, public relations, and the usage of both English language and literature in our day-to-day life. To discuss the topic, we have today in the studio two eminent speakers from the field of literature and language. For the field of literature, we have with us Dr. Girish Pawar. He is currently a faculty at the Department of English, University of Hyderabad. His area of interest includes cultural studies, new literatures in English, modern literature, theatre and transmedia studies. We also have Mr. Swapnil Shirsath for the field of language. He is an assistant professor of communication skills at MIT Arts, Design and Technology University, Pune. His area of interest include communication skills, soft skills, grammar and business communication. I'm sure we will all benefit greatly from the discussions that we will have today with our panelists. Before we give time to them, I shall explain briefly on how today's program shall be structured. We will have a brief presentation from both the speakers, following which there will be an opportunity for the viewers to call in with your questions. You may call in to the studio at the following numbers. The numbers are 270-314-31, 270-314-32 and 270-314-33. If you are calling in from outside of Hyderabad, please remember to add 040 before the numbers. Also, we advise the viewers to turn down your television sets when you are calling in with your questions. We request that the viewers take full advantage of this opportunity so that we can bring to you the best that we can. Without further ado, let us begin with the first segment. I now request Dr. Girish to make your introductory remark.
Thank you, Alma. So as you have introduced the topic that we would be talking about literary public culture in the English literature and English language, largely what both of us, the panelists, would be focusing on various roles that the English literature and language play in one's life. We would be focusing on various roles, at the same time how they are very practical and very pragmatic. One should not forget that when it comes to English literature, since I will be dealing with English literature plays extremely important role, not in just an academician's life, but in a layman's life as well. I will get to this point a little later when I explain what I mean by a layman's point of view. So firstly, what I will be looking at is the various roles that literature play in one's life. I will not be getting into the traditional ideas that literature talks about universal truth. These are quite known responses. My attempt here would be to talk about it in a very pragmatic way in a very practical way. So I have sketched down few roles, and accordingly I will be talking about them. So firstly, I will be talking about how literature functions as a memory. Let's think about how literature or the literary journey began. Let's not forget, we started with larger narratives. Let's think about epic narratives like Beowulf till the modern day. For instance, the Twitter fiction or the poetry that is created around us nowadays. So I'll be talking about how literature becomes a part of one's memory. Not just one's part of memory, rather a cultural memory. That's why we are talking about literary public memory or public society, or how it transforms one's ideas. The second topic that I would like to discuss a little later, that how literature is a part of general awareness. Later I'll also be discussing how literature is one of the best tools to fragment your reality through imagination. I would also be talking about how literature has become an academic practice, which is an extremely important role that one has to be aware of. Then I'll be looking at how it has transformed over the period of time, how various genres have evolved right from the beginning to the modern day. Later I'll be also looking at literature becomes a fascinating tool to talk about various stories. For instance, who doesn't like a fascinating narrative? Let's not forget, the first story that we hear is in fact imaginary story. It creates our own world. So I'll be looking at how literature becomes a tool of telling interesting and amazing stories. And lastly, I would like to conclude with how a readership could benefit out of reading certain literary modes, or rather literary practices. And I have also thought about an idea which is a literary caution, how certain kind of slippages take place when we read. And I'm sure my friend would have a lot of language topics to add into it. So I'll also be talking about how it creates a readership, at the same time how it also deals with those slippages that happens in literary studies. So this is what my initial observations are about roles of not just English literature, but any other literature for that matter. So these are my opening remarks, and I will get into each of this little later.
Thank you, Dr. Girish. Mr. Swapnil, would you like to make your introductory remark?
Right. So thank you so much, Alma, for this wonderful introduction of ours. Girish has just talked about the roles of literature in the society. My main focus will be on the roles of languages in our society. My main focus would be on the English language, especially because it plays an important role in the development of one's character and the society and culture. Whatever thoughts we have, we express through languages, and that's very important. For example, when we read literature, whatever knowledge we gain, if you want to express that knowledge, we express that knowledge through a language, and therefore, language is a medium of communication. If I want to talk about the English language is also known as local language. Now it's a mixture of global and local. So it is not just used at national and international level, but also at local level. And in India, it has a great impact on it. So we'll be talking about different professions that we have in English, and how English is very important in all those professions. So no matter which profession you take, whether you take engineering, whether you talk about doctor, whether you talk about any other things, you require the English language. And if you are very good at English language, you you can do wonders in your society as well as in your professional career.
All right, thank you, Mr. Swapnil. Dr. Girish, you talked about the role of literature in our day-to-day life. Would you like to elaborate on the transformation of literary forms through the years?
Sure. So as I started, that it plays a very important role in our tradition, in our memory, in memory formation. What I mean by the mode of transformation or the evolution, let's go back in time and in history. Just observe one of the earliest surviving texts that is roughly called as the beginning of English literature. If you go back to times and in history, we would observe that we began with narrative, longer narratives. We call it epic narratives. These stories are about, as we know, about the heroes who are on the quest, and later we also observe that these storytelling modes, or rather narratives, have evolved over the period of time. Each time frame, each age, as we divide it in English literature, right from Old English to Middle English, and then with Renaissance we say that it's a modern English. And ever since Shakespeare comes in, we have different modes of narratives, and slowly till modern day, if we observe minutely, there are amazing transformations happening. I will very briefly be talking about, very shortly be talking about the popular culture, how narratives have evolved over a period of time in popular modes. So if you look at the earliest forms of narratives, these forms of narratives are through large narratives. They are very subject specific. They have certain kind of objective, and they try to meet that objective. Later we also see that epic narrative evolves into romance, where a touch of reality has been introduced, and slowly it gets into mock tradition of writing. What we have is, think about Spanish texts like Don Quixote. From there what we have is a different mode of narration. Now you create a space for a character where he or she talks about psychological realism. What I mean by psychological realism is that you get to see not a character from distance, rather you get to feel the character. The character will have certain kind of qualities that you can very easily associate with. For example, think about Shakespearean, or rather Shakespeare's tragedies heroes. You very well associate with them, but towards the end of the play, you also feel that these characters are talking from little distance. But think about the prose writing, especially in 1740s on, texts like Pamela and all the other novels that followed later. So you would observe that the characters are becoming very lifelike. Now I'm not denying the fact that the earlier characters, let's say from other genres, were not equally evolving or equally appealing, but here what happens is you get to see yourself. I'm sure one could associate with earlier literature also in that way, but this transformation is very crucial in order to understand the evolution of literature. From there we get to see various kinds of modes. Think about how narratives are produced through journalistic writings. Let's observe how it slowly becomes the language of letters. A certain kind of academics touch is being introduced. Slowly it's not just about pleasing one audience or one kind of audience. It in fact crosses all the boundaries and tries to inculcate all the ideas. From there on, what we have is something really remarkable. The idea of subjectivity is introduced. It had always been there, but not in this amazing fashion how Wordsworth, Coleridge and their contemporaries have done. And then slowly with Victorian age we get to see a very refined language, where the language of letters becomes very important. And when it comes to modern age, something really remarkable again happens. Now what we have is a story within story, which may be related to you, which may not be related to you, but you have been told very convincingly that it's your story. So that makes it very fascinating. And ever since films been introduced, I would be talking about films for a while. Ever since from 1895, films been introduced by Lumiere brothers and of course the other French contemporaries, the medium again changes. So this is what I mean by the transformation part. Now think about adaptations. We have earliest adaptations of French texts. Think about Landing Over the Moon, one of the earlier shorts, and George Méliès's, and all the other filmic modes. Now what these filmic modes do, they don't just tell us stories, they show us the story. Now of course it's an extension of theatre, it's an extension of modern theatre and a lot of technical wizardry, no doubt about it. But look at the way that transformation takes place. Now you in fact get to see what you wanted to feel. You can actually look at the actor, the expressions, so everything is accessible to you. And this accessibility changes each and every perception that one could have in, let's say, Elizabethan age, when drama had its golden or heydays, right? So that's what I mean. And as film is introduced, slowly, poetry becomes very, very accessible to each and everyone. What I mean by this is, let's not forget that every song we listen to is a kind of poetry. Of course, the modern, a lot of people will disagree to the point, because the kind of songs now being produced, but look at the 80s and 90s songs, if I could just refer to that. You would find the literary touch to it, the beauty of music, the melody, the rhythm, and all the other literary aspects, or rather features that one looks for in literature. And slowly it keeps on evolving, and by the 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s, what we have is popular culture. Now you've lived the experience, you make it part of your life, and people do say that popular culture is charged with statements like it's a massy culture, that's why it's not classy. I would not really be getting into that debate, but my primary focus is that popular culture becomes an extremely important tool of literary practices, literary transformation, the accessibility, and the most fascinating thing that I think about popular culture is, or rather film studies and all the modern ways of portraying stories or telling narratives, is that they tell you stories so convincingly that you forget that it's a story. And that's what I think the beauty of literature is, or these popular mediums and modes is, that it makes you forget that you are witnessing something very literary. Now think about this. Suppose there is an academic practice. If a student is asked to analyze a film, there will be different kind of analysis. But if the same student is asked to observe one particular movie and just give your remarks, there will be different kind of understanding. So the popular culture, the modern mediums creates this platform where you get to practice what you always wanted to. And this is what this transformation, right from the longest narrative strategies to modern fictions like Twitter fiction, short stories, stories that have only 1 word, 2 words, 3 words, and which is so fascinating. Think about graphic poetry, think about lyrical novels. If I could give a few examples, think about Nabokov's beautiful novel called Pale Fire. The fascinating thing about this book is that the book is written in the form of foreword. It talks about all the fictional world. It creates a fictional world called Zembla, and the most fascinating thing is that the more that it is written is in forewords. There are multiple examples like that. So this makes the entire journey very exciting, and this is what I mean by the transformation of literature, or transforming nature of literature over the period of time.
Thank you, Dr. Girish. What was really striking to me was about how you mentioned that it has suddenly become very accessible to us. What comes to my mind is when Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature, there were certain dissents as well.
Absolutely.
So would it be considered, with his winning of the Nobel Prize, would it be considered a transformation as well, or would you think it is going back to tradition, since you mentioned that it was not a separate genre?
That's very interesting, at the same time very controversial question, sorry to say that, but I'm glad that you brought it up. See, one can't really say if it's right or wrong. I don't think we are here to judge anything. There are better people to do that, I believe. But what I think is, why not? I'm not getting into how that music is composed and what has been composed, but why not? Why not we include, since everybody starts their journey with the literary story, why not? And lyrics and songs are a crucial part of it. So I feel, why not?
Yes, all right, thank you.
It should be.
It's another very interesting observation, because in his acceptance speech,
Yes.
Bob Dylan actually mentioned that when he mused, when Shakespeare was writing his play, did he think he was writing literature?
Yes.
So more on the genre, we'll
Yes.
get back to it later. Now we'll move on to Mr. Swapnil. Would you like to talk about, let's say, the usage of English language in professional communication? You know, the practical uses in our day-to-day life?
Absolutely. Girish has talked about movies, films, poetries, and other things. That's a wonderful explanation by him. If I want to talk about professional communication, first of all, we have to understand that all these things come under communication skills. And when you talk about communication skills, you talk about the ideas that you have, and you share those ideas with your audiences. That's very important. Now, if you look at any profession, no matter which profession you are in, whether you are a lecturer, a doctor, a scientist, right, or an anchor like you, we must have good communication skills. Gone are the days when your only biggest asset used to be your knowledge. But nowadays, apart from your knowledge, you should also be good at communication skills. So soft skills, English language, professional communication skills, all these things come under communication skills. So I know some students, they find it very difficult to go and crack interviews. When it comes to the subject knowledge, they are very sound, they are very good at it. But when it comes to explanation of that particular subject or that particular topic, they fail to do so. I often tell my students that your marks definitely are very important, but your marks will take you towards the interview. But your communication skills will help you crack the interview. That's very important. And your communication skills will not just help you at the time of the interview, right? Your marks will be valid only till the interview, but later on, the way you behave is more important. Soft skills, for example, what comes under soft skills? Your expressions, facial expressions, right? Your body language, verbal, non-verbal communication, formal communication, informal communication, all these things come. And all these things are also a part of public culture, right? For example, we should also understand the differences in culture. I'll give you one example. When we were children, parents used to tell us that whenever you communicate with your elders, do not look into the eyes of the elders, because that's not very good. But nowadays, what's happening in business English, or let's say in business, if you do not maintain eye contact, that is considered as if you're telling a lie or you're not very confident, right? So absolutely, all these things are pretty much important.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So I would like to get back to Dr. Girish about the tools of storytelling, as we have already talked about the accessibility.
Yes.
So would you like to elaborate on it?
Yes. Thanks for reminding me this fascinating part of storytelling. Why I said that it's one of the important roles of narration or storytelling is, just let me go back to my earlier observation that how the transformation takes place, how the medium changes. Think about it. The first story that we heard, we in fact believed it for a certain amount of time. We in fact started believing in fairies, that there are other worlds, and if you had interesting childhood like me, I also believed that there are aliens. So what stories do, they start making you believe in something. Now the debate will be entirely different. Are you talking about imaginary world? Are you talking about real world? But what it does is, it makes you believe in something. It starts forming your ideas. It starts telling you that your observation, your perception, your certain amount of understanding, or rather cultural signification, makes the story either very interesting or perhaps boring. It depends. Now think about this. All the stories that we have been talking about, or all the stories or all the narratives, they are rendered around this very central idea that there's always something going on in a story, where there's always a tussle between good and bad. If you have this one single thread of storytelling, now I'm trying to generalize it, and it's an observation, and you are free to opine over it and give your responses. But most of the stories, you will find that there is always the idea of friction in the story, in the narration, and stories are rendered around it. Then you have different modes and different features to introduce in your story. But what story does it starts making you look at other stories in different ways. Now what I mean by that is, your practices in one particular genre, let's say a love story, and when you discuss the same narrative, let's say in the modern way or in the modern terms, the story may not be the same, but it will take its general formula right from the history and right from the beginning. Now let me just go back to Aristotle's ideas about story, that there has to be a proper beginning, there has to be a proper middle, and the most important, either satisfying or non-satisfying or not really pleasing to each and everyone, ending. Now the modern narratives, I'm not just saying that modern narratives, but very interesting narratives challenge this very idea. And let's not forget, Shakespeare himself has challenged these ideas of three unities and other ideas of narrative stories. Now once the narrative makes you believe in something, now the next challenge that it offers is, rather I hope I'm not overstating by using the word challenge, but what it asks you to do is that what is next after this? Then you start analyzing various stories, you start collecting these stories, you start analyzing it. And that's why I said that literature makes you an analytical entity, where you start believing in something, you start analyzing in something, and this is extremely important for an academician, for somebody like you, I'm sure, who's pursuing research. Now in research you have to analyze it, and we are not really aware of the process that literature has been telling us. Later comes a point where you have to take help of various tools or methods or methodologies that we practice and we train students in the later phase. Now once you have these tools with you, for instance, one particular text could be looked at from multiple perspectives. Now think about one of the most celebrated poems in English literature class is, I'm sure, Daffodils. Wordsworth Daffodils is one of the most celebrated poems. The beauty about this poem is that you still can interpret it in so many ways. Let me just share one experience I had, a fascinating experience I had with my friend. One fine morning he comes to me and says that Daffodils is in fact a religious poem, and I was struck. I mean, I was struggling to understand that why is he saying that it's a religious poem. Then he alluded all the allusions from the poem that refer to the Bible. He talked about inward eye, words like inward eye, judgment, and all the cloud. He compared it with the state of mind of the characters from the Bible and all that. Now I'm not saying that only this poem does that. I'm also not saying that the earlier text did not do that. What happens is, once you are well practiced in knowing and deciphering this fascinating mode of storytelling, you start observing more than there is to observe, or offer rather. And that's why Wordsworth says that poetry is something that offers where there is more to offer. It always challenges your boundaries, and that's what happens in poetry also. I mean, the beauty of poetry is that it's endless interpretation. Again, it depends on your Understanding depends on the reading practices that you have had. Or another example I could give, think about the adaptation studies for that matter, or adaptations. Think about literary adaptation, think about any other adaptation for that matter. You would often come around this idea that if you read, let's say, a text in its original form or the first language that it was produced in, and if you read a translation of the same text, people always say that there's a lost in it. And this particular lost, I'm not sure how to address that. And a lot of people also struggle to address what is really missing. And this is what I call slippages or text leaking, that we don't really understand it. To give you another example, this is from W.H.'s again very celebrated poem, Second Coming. The Second Coming, if you have seen, there is this interesting term that he uses. He uses the phrase Spiritus Mundi. Now, what he means by Spiritus Mundi, if one had to understand, one had to observe and realize, one has to go into history, dig down and do a little bit of analysis. This is what I mean by analytical mindset that it creates. And slowly what it does is, it challenges your boundaries, understanding and all that. So this way, what storytelling does is, it creates a better mind, it creates a challenging mind, at the same time analytical, but keeping in mind that stories are not really monodimensional. They are fascinating because they start telling you that these stories do matter, and let's not forget, everything that we do is in a story form, including chatting. So that's what I mean that by how it is an important tool to create or render one's world. That's what I mean.
Thank you, Mr. Swapnil. Would you like to add to what he has said? Because he has talked about how we analyze certain literary forms or texts and how it is related to our day-to-day life. Would you, in the field of language, would you say that the same method of analyzing certain sentences, how do you think we can go about analyzing certain sentences so that we do not make mistakes or misinterpret certain sentences, especially since we are talking in the context of students in India?
Yep.
Would you please elaborate on that?
I absolutely agree with what Girish has just said. First of all, we have to understand the difference between committing an error and making a mistake. Committing an error means that you do not know what is wrong and what is right, and you just go ahead. Whereas making a mistake is something that you know it, but you still make a mistake, right? So what I genuinely feel that making mistakes is not a crime. I always tell my students that it's your right to make mistakes because you are in the phase of learning this language, right? But when we talk about some things which can be which cannot be good in the society. For example, we make some silly mistakes, right, while speaking, and if you are aware of those mistakes, make sure that you don't repeat the mistake. It's your right to make mistakes, but make sure that you don't repeat the mistake. So I'll just give you some examples of how we speak, some common errors I would like to talk about. First of all, we have seen somebody introducing himself or herself by using the word myself. So people say that myself so and so, which is absolutely ungrammatical, right? So it's always my name is so and so, or I am so and so. That is one typical mistake that we make. The second thing is that look at this sentence, the pronunciation, that I'm going to first of all give you one sentence and you can read that sentence in two different ways. So it's let's eat, comma, Girish.
Okay.
The second one is let's eat, Girish, without giving any comma. And you can understand, what kind of mistake that person will make. The second thing is that we have a habit of using present perfect tense everywhere. Look at this sentence now. I have completed my graduation, or let's say post-graduation, in 2007. Now this is ungrammatical. whenever you mention date, time, etc., make sure that you do not use present perfect tense. So the correct sentence here will be, I completed my graduation in 2007. The other example could be, I am living in Hyderabad for the last 6 years, which is once again ungrammatical. You can use present perfect continuous tense here. You can say, I have been learning English for the last 6 or 7 years. But there is a debate going on that it doesn't matter if we make such mistakes. If people understand what I'm trying to say, then that's absolutely fine. It doesn't make any difference here. Then there are some common errors I would like to talk about, or common mistakes. Discuss about. Look at these two words. People generally use these two words together. They say that I'm going to discuss about this issue, or I'm going to discuss about this topic, which is again ungrammatical. It's always I'm going to discuss this topic. I would also like to talk about pronunciations. Like we have different varieties of English in India. We have Marathi English, we have Hinglish, we have Telugu English, we have Gujarati English, we have Kannada English, we have different varieties of English. I'll give you one famous example. Now this is related to Gujarati people. Generally they say, I mean not all, but there is a joke on it. They say that there are a lot of snakes available in that hole. Please go and have them. In fact, the person wants to say there are a lot of snacks available in that hall. Please go and have them. Right. So whenever we say sentences, whenever we pronounce words, make sure that we pronounce words effectively. What happens in business communication also, language keeps on changing. It keeps on changing daily, probably, after some days. Now, in business communication, while writing business letters, so let's say business emails, we used to begin the letters by saying respected sir. Now even this is outdated. Generally in business communication we use dear sir or dear ma'am, right? The second thing is that the word we often use, these two words, that's revert back. Now please go and check the meaning of this word revert. It completely means something different. We generally have to say we'll get back to you, or I'll reply. Some people also say I'll reply back, right? So those things. So if you try to avoid such mistakes, you will create a very good impression on the person. And I again say that making mistakes is not something new. Everybody makes mistakes here, including me and Girish and even the anchor. So that's absolutely fine. But we have to make conscious efforts in understanding this thing that, yeah, if you can avoid mistakes, you can do wonders. And there are some couple of examples I can give. Some people say informations, it's always a piece of information. Some people say advices, it's always a piece of advice. So make sure that you try to learn all these things, and that will definitely help you in your day-to-day life communication as well as in professional communication. And I would like to add one more point here. I just talked about soft skills. Soft skills are also very important, and what comes under soft skill, there are different things. For example, the way you carry yourself. When we conduct interviews for some students, generally we conduct some mock interviews for students so that they can crack interviews very well. We often see their body language. In the beginning itself, we come to know that, okay, this person is nervous or this person is not nervous, right? The way they enter, the way they walk, the way they sit, right? The way they wear their clothes, all these things matter. Obviously, with all these things, you should also be good at your knowledge. You should also have the knowledge, right? So if you have the combination of soft skills and your knowledge, definitely, there are a lot of opportunities open for you in the future. And that this thing happens in each and every field. I again repeat this thing, that the students, the viewers who are watching this program right now, you will realize this thing when you go for an interview, right? Some students approach us very late and they tell us that, sir, I want to improve my communication skills. So if you can start improving your communication skills, nobody in the world can stop you. You can convince your ideas very well. There are other skills too, such as time management, right? Leadership quality, for example, if you have good, if you have leadership quality, your boss will ask you to go and lead a team probably, right? If you're very good at handling clients, your boss will ask you to go and handle clients, right? So all these things matter the most, and making mistakes, it's our right, and this is how we learn. That's what I feel.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Swapnil. That was absolutely true. I think what I heard most during my graduation class from our teachers was that quote unquote children today do not read as much as they did back in their days. So as a teacher of communication skills, do you think there is a point of convergence between communication skills and literature, since we have dealt with literary public culture as well in Dr. Girish's introductory remark?
Definitely.
Yes, Dr. Girish.
Before we move on to next segment, I would like to make few observations regarding what Swapnil has just said. It's very fascinating how you describe these ideas. But what comes to my mind is something very similar that you talked about. Though it be business communication, though it be any other specific purpose or the language that is used for specific purpose, what strikes me the most is that the way these languages have been learnt, the way they have been trained for certain kind of purpose, that really strikes me. I usually talk about this, and I always get various confusing statements when I say these languages have been taught to us. Now, I always wonder, we do not really know the grammar of our mother tongue. I'm not sure if we are really technically sound in our mother tongues, but we do converse quite fluently. I don't feel the hesitation in the voice. But the moment we switch to a trained language, for instance, you've talked about various dialects, you talked about different kinds of languages, you talked about Pidgin English, you talked about English, you talked about Marathi, Gujarati, Punjabi, all forms of various, rather variations of language, which is so fascinating that you don't have one language, rather you have a structure based on one language, which is again welcomed by the regional language. Of course, the regional touch would of course be coming in. It will always affect the way you pronounce certain things. And what I feel, being literary, being the pursuer of literature, that these ideas could very well be welcomed in literature. I know it's quite a different kind of observation, but somebody tries to understand what Yeats means by Spiritus Mundi, and if the same thing is talked to you from, let's say, your culture, your medium of conversation, I think it will have a very interesting impact on somebody's reading, or readership rather. If you could, for instance, think about words like chai, and think about the word tea. When an Englishman says tea, and when an Indian like me says tea, there's a huge difference. But the moment I say chai, I know what I want. I want a certain kind of chai that is.
There is a feeling in
yes,
it.
there is. It's very emotional at the same time.
Exactly.
And it becomes part of your language, your culture, and that makes it very fascinating. So what I feel is that this conscious and this unconscious effort, if Swapnil could just talk about these practices, I would really be happy. And there are a few other observations also. Now, for instance, you talked about various forms, or rather variations of English language, which are also again fascinating to me, because I still think in my mother tongue, then I try to translate it in some other language, and then it flows through English language, which is, I'm sure, pretty bad. Then the other dialects that I hear and listen, I try to borrow a lot from that. Then again, as you pointed out, the pronunciation part, which again is very fascinating. You actually want to hear that kind of English. You really don't want to hear the received pronunciation over and over and over again. And of course, the most fascinating part that you talked about, the ellipsis part. Certain things are kept in language, at the same time certain things are left out deliberately. So These are really fascinating observations. So I just would like to know about this conscious and unconscious way of learning language.
Exactly. So, first of all, I would like to tell you that there are two ways of learning a language. One is conscious way of learning a language, and the second one is unconscious way of learning a language. Now, when you talk about unconscious conscious way of learning a language, that's your mother tongue. I'm sure that your mother never taught you the grammar of your language or your mother tongue, right?
Yeah.
Your mother spoke to you in your ears probably, and this is how you unconsciously learnt it, right? And that is the way, this is how we learn our mother tongue. That's unconscious way. Conscious way means, for example, the English language. We study the grammar first, and then later on we apply the rules of the grammar in a day-to-day life conversation, right? So being a teacher, we often tell our students to learn English in unconscious way, but at the same time make sure that you are aware of your mistakes when you make.
True.
Right. So how will you do it? First, the first important thing that is there in every language is listening. Listening plays a vital role. There are 4 different skills of language: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. If you have the combination of all these things, I'm sure that you will be a very good speaker. So listening, what you have to listen to? You have to listen to good English. You have to listen to good literature probably, or you have to read good literature, and Girish will be a better person to talk about it more. The next most important part is the practice of speaking in English. Even that's very important, because if you just keep on listening to a language and if you don't practice, make sure that then there will be a problem. So practice a lot. You can talk with your friends, you can have conversations with your teachers, you can have conversations with your friends, family members, and this is how you learn a language. And the same thing happened with Girish and me. We are from regional mediums. We tried to learn this language with conscious way, but later on we switched and then we started learning it in unconscious way. So that really helps. Definitely, you can also watch some news channels, good news channels such as BBC News, or probably
All
other
right,
things.
thank you, Mr. Swapnil. Now we will have other questions from our viewers. So, hello?
Hello.
Hello, yes?
Yeah, hi madam. I'm Shivakumar.
Hello, Shivakumar.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about what kind of a soft skills should a person have to impose within himself to crack an interview. Time management, I've heard time management and the interview tracking skills and all. So could you give me brief description about that, each and every thing?
All right, thank you very much for the question. I think the question is specifically for Mr. Swapnil. If you could answer to that, he would like to know about how you could crack an interview.
So generally what happens on the panel, the panelist first of all observe your body language. That's very important. When you enter, the way you enter is where you are hired or you are rejected. After that, when you enter, make sure that you ask them to sit. Generally what happens, we try to grill our students when we conduct mock interviews. So what we generally do, we don't ask the candidate to sit. If he just stands there, then we can understand that he cannot make his own decisions. But if he directly comes and sits on the chair, then probably we feel that he is an arrogant person. But if he waits for a few minutes and then later on he takes permission, sir, may I sit? Then we feel that yes, definitely, this person knows how to behave and when. Time management plays a vital role. Make sure that you reach the interview in time. There is a difference between on time and in time. Once again, in time means well before the time given, and the second one is on time means exactly on time. So you have to reach there in time. Make sure that you wear proper formal clothes. If you're wearing a black belt, make sure that your shoes are black as well, right? Your hair are combed, right? There is a smile on your face. Even that is where most of the people make mistakes. So there should be constant smile on your face. and when you smile, definitely people will select you. The other thing is that we should also use expressions effectively. For example, when you're sharing a joke, make sure that there is a smile on your face, and make sure that when you're giving a bad piece of news, there is no smile on your face. Right? So you should have both the things together. All these things matter, and the most important thing that matters, obviously, your knowledge, the subject knowledge that you have. So I wish you all the best. I'm very sure that you will face the interview very well. All the best.
Thank you, Mr. Swapnil. I'm not sure if we have time for another question.
Yeah.
We do? All right, we can have another question. So, hello?
Okay.
No.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. I hope this session today has been very useful for our listeners. I hope that our viewers who have been listening in have been enriched by the discussion. We thank Dr. Girish and Mr. Swapnil for being with us today. Thank you.
Okay, it's continue. You have to continue.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Okay. We have another question? All right.
No.
Right. So we
10
still
minutes.
have time
We
to discuss certain.
We still have 10 minutes,
All
I
right.
guess.
Okay.
So we can in fact discuss about
Okay.
a few other ideas that we shared.
All right.
So maybe briefly in 3 to 4 minutes, I would like to talk about the last idea that I had in my mind. It's regarding the last rule that I talked about when it comes to literature. And now I'm trying to make it very subject specific. I'm trying to make it as an academic practice, and how a readership goes through a certain kind of reading. So what I wish to discuss right now is the way we talk about literary practices.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. Hello?
Hello.
Yes?
Yes, I'm Ravindra Sari from Suryapet.
Hello? Yes? Tell us
Good
your question.
afternoon, sir and madam.
Good afternoon.
Sir, sir, I studied MA English.
Okay.
I qualified state in English, sir.
Okay.
So,
I would like to be in teaching field. Sir, whenever I attend interviews at various institutions, so what steps to be followed when I am facing interview with the expert committee?
All right. Thank you for your question, Mr. Swapnil.
right. First of all, I would like to request Girish to talk about it first from net set point of view, and then
Okay.
I'll talk about the language.
Thanks for your question. If I got it right, you want to talk about you want to know how to go about in interview. So the earlier question was related to the same question, the explanation rather. What Swapnil has already talked about, what I would like to add into it is he's talked about how you present yourself, the subject knowledge that you have, and the most important thing about being prepared for an interview is I personally feel that the mock interviews are extremely important. You can practice it in mirror, you can give a mock interview to your friends, you can time yourself, you can create a questionnaire, a list of questions, what kind of questions could be asked. You can talk about yourself in a very different way, so that you present yourself as a different from others. For instance, think about your name. Usually we introduce ourselves as I am so and so. What if, let's say, your name is let's say Mahendra. You can introduce yourself by saying that my name says Mahendra Singh Dhoni. I hope I'm not overstating it, but I'm just trying to grab the attention of the panelists here. So what you would you should do is you meet the usual requirements in a different way, so that your sense of humor also is reflected, your presence of mind is reflected. So if you could just make it a little bit more lively and not think about interview as a kind of problem area. You have to be very relaxed. present yourself, you have to be very composed, as Swapnil has just observed. So these are certain things or part of soft skills that you have to be aware of. And next to that, you talked about that you want to come in a teaching field. You're most welcome. The most fascinating thing about teaching is you always remain young. You always get to learn. You're never really a teacher. You always remain a student. Exactly. So that, I think, is what one has to do. One has to be very curious at the same time. A certain amount of ease and sense of humor and, of course, presence of mind will definitely help you a lot.
Right. And to add one more point here, if I may.
Yeah.
Girish has talked about how to face interviews and other things. What I would like to talk about is that human beings learn from his mistakes. So try to face as many interviews as possible. I'm very sure that there will be, you will be very confident after, let's say, 1 or 2 experiences, and you will definitely crack the interview. Teaching is a beautiful field, let me tell you. We both enjoy teaching a lot. He enjoys teaching literature. I enjoy teaching the English language. So definitely you will definitely enjoy it, and you have already cracked NET or SET, correct me if I'm wrong, and that shows that yes, you have good knowledge about the subject. The only thing you need is practice and experience, and with the combination of both these things, I'm sure that you will do wonders. All the best.
Thank you, Mr. Swapnil. With that, shall we?
Yeah, I will resume from where I left. This literary practice that I was talking about, there is a very interesting literary term called literary modern iconicalism. Now what it means is a certain kind of hostility towards either sound or image. So what has happened in modern times is, this is one of the observations made by critics, especially Mario Clerer, that what has happened is we have learnt to create pictures out of narratives or stories, but we have forgotten the sound of it or the beauty of it. Now here I would like to mention the very interesting and fascinating realm called oral tradition or oral literature for that matter. Now oral literature or oral tradition had this wonderful understanding of narration. Look at the way how certain cultural dances are performed, cultural songs are sung. They are not really documented. They are part of a memory. They are part of the memory rather, and how they play a very vital role. So what we have done is we have been training ourselves in creating the world out of it. But it's very high time that the academicians like us, that we also start talking about or listening to the sounds. And that's what I mean, that the iconicalism we prefer images or creation of images, and in between what we lose is the sound of it. So if you could just think about this, I think it will again help us.
All right, thank you, Dr. Girish. So with this, we come to the end of our session. I'm sure our viewers have been enriched by our panelists and the topics that we have discussed today. They can write back to the department and send in your observations, comments and questions. We would be happy to respond to them. We welcome your doubts, your queries and your observations on this program. We thank Dr. Girish and Mr. Swapnil for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.